My brother stole millions, but forgot I kept the receipts. For my retirement, my brother Leo gave me a gold-plated watch, a heavy token of the record profits he claimed our company was making. That illusion of prosperity lasted until a registered letter from the IRS arrived, detailing a 7-figure tax lien that suggested the business ID bled for was nothing but a hollowed-out shell. It turned out the watch wasn't the only thing that was fake. The scent of freshly cut oak was Arthur's benediction, a ritual he had practiced for 50 years. In his workshop, a place of quiet order behind the house he'd built with his own hands, every tool had its place, every surface was free of clutter. Retirement had not softened the calluses on his palms, but it had granted him the luxury of precision without a deadline. He was turning a small, intricate spindle for his granddaughter's crib, the wood shaving away in perfect curls under the patient scrape of his chisel. This was the foundation of his new life, tangible, predictable, and solid under his touch. His wife, Eleanor, appeared in the doorway, a small stack of mail in her hand. Something from the government, Art. Looks important. She held out a stiff, cream-colored envelope, its window displaying the stern, block-lettered seal of the Internal Revenue Service. It felt heavier than it should. Registered mail always did, weighted with consequence. He wiped his hands on a rag, leaving a faint dusting of sawdust, and took the letter. Back in the kitchen, with the scent of Eleanor's baking a stark contrast to the sterile feel of the paper, he slit the envelope open with a kitchen knife. The first page was a cover letter, dense with a kind of polite, bureaucratic menace. The second was the one that mattered. His eyes, accustomed to reading the fine print on architectural drawings, scanned the document. He saw the company name, Cresswell's Son Construction, the name he and his father had chosen, the one Leo had kept, and then he saw the numbers. They didn't make sense. The words notice of federal tax lien were clear enough, but the figure listed beneath them was an absurdity, a string of digits that seemed to belong to a nation's budget, not a family-run construction firm. $7,421,000. Plus penalties. A cold weight settled in his gut, a feeling he remembered from his early days, the dread of a bad concrete pour threatening to compromise an entire foundation. He read it again, his lips moving silently over the words. Delinquent payroll taxes. Unpaid corporate income tax. The date stretched back 3 years. 3 years of record profits, or so Leo had told him. 3 years of lavish Christmas bonuses for the staff, of Leo's new boat, of the gold-plated watch his brother had presented to him at his retirement party, its weight a symbol of their shared success. To Arthur, Leo had toasted, his voice booming with practiced sincerity, the man who laid the foundation for our empire. Arthur laid the letter flat on the polished oak of the kitchen table. He stared at the number, a black hole on the page threatening to pull his entire world into it. There was no anger, not yet. Anger was a hot, messy emotion, and this was a cold, structural problem. It was a crack in the bedrock, a fault line running unseen beneath the gleaming facade of his brother's success. He felt the familiar, instinctual urge of a builder to find the source of the stress, to understand the flaw in the design, and to see just how deep the damage went. The Sunday dinner was a standing tradition, one Leo had insisted upon after Arthur's retirement. It was held at Leo's sprawling, glass-walled house, a monument to modern success that always made Arthur feel like he was visiting a museum. The air was cool and conditioned, a stark contrast to the honest heat of his workshop. Leo, ever the magnanimous host, poured a deep red wine into glasses that cost more than Arthur's first set of power tools. His wife, Sarah, moved with a practiced grace, orchestrating the meal while Eleanor chatted easily with her. It was a perfect picture of family prosperity, a carefully constructed edifice. Arthur waited until after the main course, when the clatter of silverware had softened and the conversation lulled. He placed his napkin on the table, a deliberate, quiet gesture that drew Leo's attention. "Leo," he began, his voice level, "I need to talk to you about the business." Leo smiled, a brilliant, reassuring flash of white. "Always, Art. What's on your mind?" Worried we're making too much money without you. He chuckled, and Sarah smiled along with him. Arthur didn't smile back. He slid the folded IRS letter across the polished mahogany. This arrived on Friday. Leo's smile didn't falter, but something in his eyes tightened for a fraction of a second. He picked up the letter, his movements unhurried, as if examining a curious but ultimately harmless artifact. He read it, his expression shifting from casual interest to theatrical indignation. He let out a low whistle. "Well, it'll be," he said, shaking his head and tossing the letter back onto the table. "The government gets more aggressive every year. They tried this with the Riverfront project last quarter, too. Some new algorithm flags a transaction, and suddenly they're sending out liens like wedding invitations." He took a sip of his wine, the picture of calm authority. "It's a scare tactic, Arthur. An accounting error on their end. We have a team for this. It'll be cleared up by the end of the month." The explanation was smooth, plausible. It coated the ugly numbers on the page with a sweet, dismissive poison. Eleanor looked relieved, her shoulders relaxing. Arthur, however, felt a dissonance, a slight tremor in the structure of the lie. A $7 million error. Arthur pressed, keeping his tone inquisitive rather than accusatory. That seems substantial. Leo leaned forward, his charm becoming a focused, comforting beam. "It is. And it's infuriating. It's because of the scale we're operating at now. The new commercial tower downtown, for example, the logistics are a nightmare. We're moving so much capital, so many materials, that a misplaced decimal point in some government office in Omaha can trigger this nonsense." He warmed to his subject, gesturing with his free hand. "Just last week, we had a major headache with the steel order. Had to go back to an old reliable to get the custom girders we needed, even got a decent price from Sanderson Steel to get the job done on time." The name hung in the air. Sanderson Steel. A company Arthur knew as well as his own reflection. He remembered Old Man Sanderson, a tough but fair negotiator. He also remembered the bankruptcy auction 12 years ago, after Sanderson's son had run the company into the ground with bad deals and even worse debts. They hadn't existed for over a decade. Arthur felt no shock, just a profound and chilling clarity. The vast, incomprehensible number on the government letter suddenly became secondary to this small, specific, and impossible detail. It was the hairline crack a builder looks for, the one that tells you the entire load-bearing wall is compromised. Leo could explain away $7 million with a wave of his hand and a confident smile, but he couldn't resurrect the dead. Arthur simply nodded, picking up his wine glass. "As long as you have it handled," he said. The conversation moved on, guided by Leo into lighter, safer territories. The rest of the dinner passed in a haze of feigned normalcy, but for Arthur, the foundation of his world had been tested and found hollow. He was no longer a retiree enjoying the fruits of his labor. He was a builder standing before a condemned structure, listening to the groan of imminent collapse. The drive home was a silent one. Eleanor placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of support that needed no words. She knew him well enough to see past his placid expression to the methodical churning within. He was not a man given to outbursts. His anger was a cold, quiet thing that manifested as an intense, unnerving focus. He would dismantle a problem piece by piece until he understood its flawed mechanics, whether it was a warped door frame or a brother's lie. He didn't sleep that night. The name Leo had dropped so casually, Sanderson Steel, was a stone in his shoe, a small, sharp irritant that made comfort impossible. It was a careless mistake, the kind of error a man makes when he has been lying so long he has started to believe his own fiction. Leo had forgotten the old days, forgotten the bedrock of facts upon which they had built their lives. But Arthur had forgotten nothing. Before the sun had fully risen, he pulled down the folding stairs to the attic. The air that descended was thick with the scent of aged pine and dormant memories. He ascended into the gloom, his footsteps creaking on the rafters had laid himself 40 years ago. Past stacks of his children's old school projects and Eleanor's boxed-up seasonal decorations, he made his way to the far corner. There, under a canvas tarp, sat a row of heavy-duty filing boxes. The labels, written in his own precise, block-lettered hand, were faded but clear CS Project Bibles. He selected a box marked 9500 and carried it down, the weight of it familiar and reassuring. In the clean, morning light of his office, he lifted the lid. Inside were the ledgers. They were not flimsy notebooks but thick, cloth-bound accounting books with reinforced spines, built to withstand years of use on dusty, chaotic job sites. He ran a hand over the cover of one, feeling the embossed title Northgate Medical Center 1998. He opened it. The pages were a symphony of organized data, every line filled with his neat, angular script. This was more than just accounting, it was a diary of a building's birth. Columns detailed every single purchase, the grade of rebar, the supplier for the HVAC units, the specific blend of mortar for the brickwork. In the margins, he found his own handwritten notes, cryptic to an outsider but a perfect record to him. Hanson Plumbing tried to substitute copper pipe grades. Sent 2 shipments back. Watched them on final invoice. Another note, next to a concrete supplier's entry good poor, consistent mix. Gave them a 5 bonus. Reliability is worth paying for. This was the company's truth, written in ink. It was a testament to a business built on tangible things: steel, concrete, and an unimpeachable reputation. There were no vague abstractions, only the hard numbers of material costs, labor hours, and subcontractor bids. He knew the profit margin on every single job down to the last dollar because he had calculated it himself, by hand, right here on these pages. He pushed the ledger aside and picked up the most recent quarterly report Leo had mailed him a few months ago. It was a glossy, professionally printed booklet, full of colorful pie charts and sleek bar graphs. It spoke of synergistic growth and asset leverage. The numbers were presented in broad, sweeping categories: material expenditures, operational overheads. There were no names of suppliers, no notes on quality, no details at all. It was corporate art, designed to impress, not to inform. It was a hollow facade, and Arthur now understood that its purpose was to hide the rot within. He sat back in his chair, the old, heavy ledger open on one side of his desk, the slick, empty report on the other. The path forward was now painfully clear. He had the blueprints of the original structure. It was time to see how far the new one had deviated from the plan. Getting the company's current vendor list proved simpler than he expected. As a retired founder and emeritus board member, he still retained access to a limited corporate portal, a courtesy Leo had set up himself, likely assuming Arthur would never use it for anything more than checking on his pension distributions. The interface was a maze of sleek, modern design, all drop-down menus and password prompts, a world away from the tactile certainty of his paper ledgers. For 2 days, he taught himself the system, navigating the digital labyrinth until he could access the accounts payable records for the last 5 years. He set up his office like a command center. On one large monitor, he displayed the scanned pages of his own meticulous records. On his laptop, he logged into the company's digital world. He started with the projects he knew best, the ones whose bones he had personally set in place. The Northgate Medical Center. The downtown Civic Plaza. He cross-referenced the final cost reports he had signed off on years ago with the current payment streams. At first, nothing seemed out of place. The ongoing payments for maintenance contracts and property management were all in order, directed to legitimate firms he recognized. But then he started digging into the more recent, larger-scale projects Leo had spearheaded since his retirement. The Riverfront Tower was the first red flag. According to Leo's glossy reports, it was a masterpiece of efficiency. According to the payment records, it was a ghost that refused to stop spending money. He found an invoice from 6 months ago for $2 million, paid out for specialized concrete additives. The recipient was a company called Apex Global Ventures. Arthur frowned. He knew every major concrete supplier on the continent had negotiated deals with most of them. Had never heard of Apex. A quick search online revealed a company with a registered address at a mail forwarding service in Delaware and a website that was little more than a stock photo of a skyscraper. The payment was authorized against the Riverfront Project code. But Arthur's own final ledger for that job, completed and signed off 2 years prior, showed all concrete work fully paid and accounted for. This was a ghost invoice, a charge for a service rendered to a finished building. It was impossible. He kept digging, his movements becoming more deliberate, more precise. He followed the digital breadcrumbs, a trail of phantom charges and hollow companies. Apex Global Ventures, Ridgeway Logistics, Sterling Material Solutions. They were all the same vague names, P.O. box addresses, and multi-million-dollar invoices for materials on projects that had been gathering dust for years. The money was flowing out of Cresswell's son, hemorrhaging into a network of shell corporations that seemed to evaporate into the digital ether. After hours of methodical searching, a pattern emerged. While payments were made to several of these phantom entities, the largest transfers, the truly colossal sums, were consolidated and funneled through one primary company. It was the hub at the center of the web. He clicked on the vendor profile, and a name filled the screen: Briarwood Development Group. The name didn't key register at first. It was generic, professional. He stared at it, a flicker of a memory trying to catch fire in the back of his mind. Briarwood. He closed his eyes, thinking not of steel and concrete, but of his childhood. He saw his mother, years younger, sitting at their kitchen table, telling him and Leo stories about the little house where she grew up, the one with the climbing roses and the big oak tree in the front yard. The house on Briarwood Lane. A profound coldness, sharper than any winter wind, settled deep in his bones. This was not just a sophisticated financial crime. This was an act of profound, calculated cynicism. Leo had named the engine of his theft after a cherished family memory, turning their mother's nostalgia into a brand for his betrayal. He was siphoning the lifeblood from their father's legacy and hiding it behind the name of their mother's childhood home. The warmth of the memory was instantly extinguished, replaced by the chilling realization that to his brother, nothing was sacred. The discovery of Briarwood Development Group changed the nature of the problem. This was no longer an investigation into a financial discrepancy, it was an excavation of a tomb. Arthur knew the digital trail he was following was meticulously designed to mislead. To understand the true architecture of the fraud, he needed someone who had seen the original blueprints. He needed Frank Gable. Frank had been their first and only head accountant for 30 years, a man whose defining characteristics were his cautious nature and his unwavering loyalty. He had retired 3 years ago, citing a sudden desire to travel with his wife, a story that had felt thin even at the time. Arthur found him not in an RV park in Florida, but in a second-floor apartment in a dreary suburban complex an hour outside the city. The name on the buzzer was smudged and barely legible. The man who opened the door was a ghost of the Frank he remembered. The once sturdy accountant was now stooped and thin, his face a roadmap of anxiety. He looked at Arthur not with surprise, but with a deep, weary dread, as if he had been expecting this knock for years. He ushered Arthur inside without a word, bolting the door behind him. The apartment was sparsely furnished and impeccably clean, the kind of sterile order that speaks not of peace, but of a mind desperate for control. Frank didn't offer a drink, he just stood in the middle of the living room, wringing his hands. "He sent you," Frank whispered, his voice raspy. "Leo sent you." "Leo doesn't know I'm here," Arthur said, his tone calm and steady. He pulled out a piece of paper and laid it on the small coffee table. On it, he had written a single name: Briarwood Development Group. Frank flinched as if struck. He collapsed into a worn armchair, his face pale. The dam of his fear finally broke. "I told him it was a mistake," he stammered, words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "I told him using that name was sick. He just laughed. Said it was poetic." For the next hour, Frank's story unspooled. He had noticed the irregularities about 4 years ago, small at first, then growing into a torrent of phantom invoices and shell companies. When he confronted Leo, his brother hadn't denied it. Instead, had presented Frank with an offer, a generous early retirement package and a sworn non-disclosure agreement. The alternative, Leo had made clear, was not just unemployment, but complete ruin. Frank, with a sick wife and a mountain of medical bills, had taken the deal and the silence that came with it. "He's not just moving money, Art," Frank said, his eyes wide with a fear that went beyond financial crime. "There are two sets of everything. The clean books, the ones the auditors and you see on the portal, that's the facade. Then there's the shadow ledger. That's where the real business is done. It's all on a separate server, encrypted. Can you get me in?" Arthur asked, his voice a quiet command. Frank hesitated, chewing on his lip. Then he seemed to make a decision. He scurried to a small desk and wrote a string of characters on a notepad. It was a long, complex server address. "This is the back door. The password is the date Dad's first workshop burned down." Leo always did have a dark sense of humor. Arthur took the paper, the final key to the locked room. As he stood to leave, Frank grabbed his arm, his grip surprisingly strong. There was a new urgency in his eyes, a genuine terror that had nothing to do with numbers on a page. "Be careful, Art," he pleaded. "This isn't just your brother anymore. He used the money to get into bed with some very serious people. Investors. They helped him expand, but they don't tolerate mistakes, and they don't forgive exposure. I saw their names in the shadow ledger. These aren't men who file lawsuits. Your brother built this new empire on a foundation of their money. If you knock it down, they won't just come for him. They'll come for the man holding the hammer." Frank's warning echoed in the sterile quiet of Arthur's office. He stared at the string of characters on the notepad, the address to a place that wasn't he supposed to exist. His hands, steady enough to carve wood to 1/1000th of an inch, felt clumsy on the keyboard as he typed the address into his browser. The screen went blank for a moment before resolving into a stark, gray login portal. There was no company logo, no branding, just two empty fields: user ID and password. He entered Frank's credentials. For the password, he paused. The date Dad's first workshop burned down. He closed his eyes, the memory surfacing unbidden. He had been 12, Leo just 7. The smell of ash, the sight of their father standing silhouetted against the orange glow, a figure of silent, resolute despair. It was the first great tragedy of their lives, a loss that had forged their determination to build something permanent, something that couldn't burn. That Leo had repurposed this sacred, painful date as a key to his secret world felt like a final, intimate desecration. He typed the numbers and hit enter. The system that loaded was nothing like the company's public portal. There were no graphics, no charts, just raw, interconnected spreadsheets and transaction logs. It was a builder's tool, not a salesman's presentation, brutally efficient and ruthlessly detailed. It was the dark twin of his own paper ledgers. Here, stripped of all pretense, was the unvarnished truth of the last 5 years. He saw it all. The real profit margins, staggering in their scale, were immediately rerouted upon receipt. For every dollar officially declared by Cresswell's son, 3 more flowed silently into this shadow system. He followed the money, clicking through layers of ledgers that documented a breathtakingly ambitious plan. It was not a simple smash and grab embezzlement. It was a controlled demolition. He saw how Leo had systematically loaded the old company with fabricated debt. The ghost invoices to Briarwood, Apex, and the others weren't just about stealing cash, they were about creating massive, artificial liabilities on the official books. This manufactured debt drove the company's stated value down, quarter by quarter, while simultaneously funding a second, parallel operation. With the stolen capital, Leo, operating through Briarwood Development, was acquiring land, stockpiling equipment, and poaching key engineers, building a new company from the stolen ribs of the old one. The IRS tax lien was no accident. It was a masterstroke of the plan, a carefully calculated event designed to be the final, crushing weight on the company's valuation. It was meant to create a crisis, a panic. But why? Why not just steal the money and disappear? The answer lay not in the digital ledger, but in a dusty, leather-bound document in his filing cabinet. He retrieved the original partnership agreement for Cresswell's son, signed by him, Leo, and their father 40 years ago. His finger traced down the page, past the articles on profit sharing and responsibilities, until he found the clause they'd insisted on for protection against a market collapse. Article 12, Dissolution and Buyout. It stated that if the company's certified valuation fell below a pre-agreed threshold for 2 consecutive fiscal quarters, either partner had the right to initiate a mandatory buyout of the other's shares at the current, depressed price. The full architecture of the betrayal was now laid bare before him. This was never just about theft. It was a corporate assassination designed to look like a mercy killing. Leo was going to drive the company he inherited into the ground, trigger the clause, and buy Arthur's half of their father's legacy for pennies on the dollar. He would then fold the few remaining valuable assets of Cresswell's son into his new, debt-free Briarwood empire, an empire built with Arthur's own money. He was erasing the family name from the business, erasing Arthur from its history, all under the guise of a perfectly legal contract. The final insult was that Arthur himself had signed the very paper that was meant to be his undoing. He leaned back, the hum of the computer the only sound in the room. There was no fire of rage, only the cold, heavy certainty of a man looking at a flawed blueprint. He saw the weak points, the over-leveraged connections, the unstable foundation of his brother's new world. Frank's warning about Leo's partners added a chilling dimension of physical risk, but it didn't change the equation. A structure built on a lie, no matter how grand, cannot stand. The urge for retribution was a primal thing, a hot current that demanded he pick up the phone and call the district attorney. It would be simple, clean. He had the evidence, the motive, the method. He could send Leo to prison, watch the company that bore his father's name collapse under the weight of scandal, and walk away with the bitter satisfaction of having been proven right. But as he sat in the pre-dawn silence, the thought of it brought him no peace. To burn it all down would be to finish the job Leo had started. It would destroy the livelihoods of hundreds of employees, men and women he had hired and worked alongside for decades. It would tarnish the Cresswell name forever, leaving a legacy of ruin. It would be a messy, emotional act, and Arthur's entire life had been a testament to precision and control. His anger cooled, hardening into something far more dangerous: a plan. He did not call the police. His first call was to a man named Marcus Thorne, a forensic accountant had once used to audit a subcontractor suspected of fraud. Thorne was a bloodhound with a calculator, a man who found poetry in spreadsheets. The second call was to a woman named Anya Sharma, a corporate lawyer known for her quiet, devastating litigation style. She specialized in hostile takeovers and partnership disputes. She did not argue cases in courtrooms, she ended them in boardrooms. He met them not in a sterile office, but in his own workshop, the scent of sawdust and machine oil thick in the air. He laid out everything on his large drafting table: his old ledgers, printouts from the company portal, and the damning evidence from Leo's shadow system. He explained the flow of money, the shell corporations, the buyout clause. He spoke without emotion, as if describing the structural flaws in a building. Thorne listened, his eyes gleaming with professional excitement. "This is elegant," he said, running a finger over a flowchart Arthur had drawn. He used the corporate veil as a load-bearing wall for the entire fraud. Brilliant, and incredibly stupid. Anya Sharma was more reserved. She studied the partnership agreement, her expression unreadable. "A criminal case is straightforward but destructive," she said, her voice precise. "It's a sledgehammer. You might demolish him, but you'll take the whole building with you. A public scandal will trigger contract cancellations, loan recalls, the company will be insolvent in a month. You'll win the battle and lose the war. What's the alternative?" Arthur asked. Sharma tapped a manicured finger on Article 7 of the agreement, the section on fiduciary duty. "This. Leo's actions constitute a gross violation of his duty to the partnership. He has acted in bad faith, deliberately harming the company for personal enrichment. This isn't just theft, it's a fundamental breach of the contract that gives him his authority. The strategy she outlined was not about punishment, but about power. It was a corporate coup, executed with surgical precision. They would not expose the fraud to the world, but to the one person who mattered, Leo. They would use Leo's own complex legal structures against him. Briarwood Development, the engine of the theft, was funded entirely by capital misappropriated from Cresswell's son. Legally, every asset it held, every piece of land, every truck, every contract, belonged to the original partnership. For the next week, they worked in secret. Thorne and his team built an ironclad, indisputable audit trail, linking every stolen dollar from Cresswell's son to every asset acquired by Briarwood. Sharma drafted a series of legal documents, a cease and desist order, a notice of fiduciary breach, and, most importantly, an asset forfeiture agreement that would transfer complete ownership of Briarwood and all its holdings directly to Arthur, as the wronged partner, to cover the damages. It was a legal checkmate. They would not be using the law as a sword to strike Leo down, but as a cage to trap him. There would be no public trial, no headlines. The goal was not to destroy his brother, but to reclaim what was stolen and salvage what was left. The battlefield would not be a courtroom, but a conference room table. The victory would be silent, the justice cold and absolute. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. Arthur had used his emeritus privileges to call it, citing urgent fiscal matters threatening the solvency of the firm as the reason. It was just formal enough to be taken seriously, and just vague enough not to arouse suspicion. The company's small board consisted of only 4 people: Arthur, Leo, and 2 long-serving senior executives who owed their careers to the Cresswell family. Arthur had quietly asked the 2 executives not to attend, ensuring the room would hold only the people who mattered. The conference room was on the top floor of the Cresswell's Sun building, a space Leo had renovated to his own tastes. It was all polished chrome and black leather, with a panoramic window that offered a god's eye view of the city they had built. Arthur arrived early with Anya Sharma and Marcus Thorne. They didn't speak. Thorne calmly arranged his files on the gleaming mahogany table, creating a neat, undeniable landscape of evidence. Binders of bank statements, flowcharts tracing money through the shell corporations, and a summary audit that distilled 5 years of complex fraud into 10 pages of cold, hard facts. In the center of it all, Sharma placed a single, thick manila envelope, sealed and stamped. Leo strode in at precisely 10 o'clock, a portrait of confident leadership. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, his smile bright and easy. He was expecting a panicked discussion about the IRS lien, a situation he was fully prepared to manage with his usual blend of charm and deflection. His smile faltered when he saw Arthur, flanked by 2 strangers. It vanished entirely when his eyes swept over the documents arrayed on the table. "Arthur, what is this?" he asked, his voice losing some of its practiced warmth. "Who are these people?" "This is Marcus Thorne, a forensic accountant," Arthur said, his voice calm, devoid of accusation. "And this is Anya Sharma, my legal counsel. Please, have a seat." Leo remained standing, his gaze fixed on the files. He was a smart man. He didn't need to read the labels to understand what he was looking at. The trap had been sprung, and he had walked right into it. A flicker of something, fear, perhaps, or just pure fury, crossed his face before being suppressed by years of practiced control. He sat, the picture of composure, but Arthur noted the slight tremor in the hand he placed on the table. Arthur didn't speak. He simply slid the 10-page audit summary across the mahogany. Leo didn't touch it. "This is a misunderstanding," Leo began, his voice regaining its smooth, reasonable tone. "Our books are clean. There's a simple explanation for all of this." "There is," Arthur agreed quietly. "It's all in there. Briarwood Development. Apex Global. Sanderson Steel." At the mention of the defunct company, A muscle in Leo's jaw twitched. It's a very thorough explanation. Sharma spoke for the first time, her voice cool and precise. Mr. Cresswell, we have 2 documents here for your consideration. The first is a full confession of financial malfeasance, wire fraud, and tax evasion, prepared for your signature. The second is an asset transfer agreement. It signs over your entire stake in Cresswell's Son, along with all assets, accounts, and holdings of Briarwood Development Group and its subsidiaries, to your brother, as restitution. She paused, letting the weight of her words fill the silent room. You have 2 options. You can sign the asset transfer. You will walk out of this company with nothing, and this matter will remain a private one between you and your brother. Or, you can refuse. In which case, she gestured to the sealed manila envelope, this complete evidence package, along with your signed confession, will be messengered to the District Attorney's Office and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. We estimate a prison sentence of 15 to 20 years. Leo stared at the envelope, then at Arthur. The mask of the charming businessman was gone, replaced by the raw, desperate face of a cornered animal. For a moment, Arthur thought he might explode, that the years of buried resentment would erupt into violence. Instead, a chilling, bitter smile touched Leo's lips. You do that? He whispered. You destroy our family's name just to get back at me. You destroyed it when you named the Shell Corporation after our mother's street, Arthur replied, his voice still level, but with an edge of cold steel. I am preserving what's left. He pushed a pen across the table. The choice is yours, Leo. Leo's gaze flickered between Arthur's implacable face and the thick envelope that held his ruin. The smooth veneer of the corporate executive cracked, and for a moment, Arthur saw the desperate, cornered man beneath. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the unspoken history of 2 brothers. This wasn't just a business transaction, it was the final, ugly severing of a bond forged in childhood. Then, a new expression settled on Leo's face. The desperation hardened into a cold, dangerous resolve. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper meant only for Arthur. You think this is the end? You think a piece of paper stops anything? I built an empire while you were in your workshop playing with wood. I have partners, Art. People you don't want to meet. People who don't care about your ledgers or your lawyers. He was invoking the ghosts Frank had warned of, the faceless investors whose money formed the foundation of his stolen enterprise. It was a crude, desperate threat, the last weapon in his arsenal. He was trying to exchange one form of leverage for another, swapping financial ruin for physical fear. Arthur did not flinch. He had anticipated this. He had seen this specific weakness in the design of Leo's plan. A structure built with other people's money has to answer to them. He met his brother's gaze, his own expression one of weary disappointment rather than fear. I know about your partners, Leo, Arthur said, his voice calm and steady, cutting through the menace. I know where the money came from. Marcus was very thorough. He glanced at Anya Sharma, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Before we came here today, Arthur continued, Miss Sharma placed a second, identical copy of that evidence package into a secure, time-locked deposit box. It contains everything, the flow of funds from them, through you, into Briarwood. All the proof they would need to see that their investment is tied to a massive fraud. If anything were to happen to me, if I were to have an accident, or simply disappear, the contents of that box will be delivered not only to the authorities, but directly to the lead investors on your list. I imagine they would be quite displeased to learn how their capital has been compromised. He let the implication hang in the air. The dead man's switch. It was a gambit of pure logic, turning Leo's greatest strength, his dangerous connections, into his most profound vulnerability. Leo couldn't afford to have Arthur harmed, because Arthur's death would trigger the very exposure he was trying to avoid. The color drained from Leo's face. The last of his bravado, the final strut in his crumbling facade, gave way. He stared at his older brother, not with hatred, but with a look of utter, blank defeat. He had been outthought, outplanned, and disarmed at every turn. Arthur hadn't played his game of threats and intimidation, he had simply built a better, stronger cage. Silence descended. Leo looked down at the documents before him, at the pen lying next to them. The empire he had built, the future he had stolen, was all reduced to this: a few pages of legal text and a line waiting for his name. With a hand that trembled slightly, he reached for the pen. The scratching sound of the nib on the heavy paper was unnaturally loud in the quiet room. He signed the first page. Then the next. He moved through the stack of documents with a mechanical, lifeless precision, giving away his life's work with a series of silent, angry strokes. When he was finished, he pushed the stack back across the table. He stood up, his movements stiff and awkward. He didn't look at Arthur again. He simply turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving behind the company, the money, and the brother he had so thoroughly underestimated. The door clicked shut, a quiet, final sound that marked the end of an empire and a family. The silence Leo left behind was heavier than any argument. Victory did not reign through the conference room. There was only the quiet rustle of paper as Anya Sharma organized the signed documents into a neat pile. The coup was complete, but the work was just beginning. Arthur, at 72, found himself pulled from the quiet solitude of his workshop and thrust back into the heart of the business world, a world he had happily left behind. The weeks that followed were a grueling campaign of legal and financial triage. Arthur was no longer a builder of wood and steel, but a salvager of a broken enterprise. The scale of the damage was immense. Leo had used Cresswell's son as a hollowed-out husk, a host for the parasite of Briarwood development. Now, Arthur had to perform a complex, painful surgery untangling the finances, renegotiating the crippling debt Leo had manufactured, and reassuring a terrified workforce whose jobs hung in the balance. He moved back into his old office, a space that felt both alien and achingly familiar. He worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and a grim sense of duty. This wasn't about profit or power, it was about honoring the men and women who had given their careers to the company. It was about ensuring his father's name on the door didn't become a synonym for failure and fraud. He met with bankers, reassured suppliers, and walked through job sites, his presence a steadying force for anxious foremen and nervous subcontractors. He was dismantling Leo's shadowy empire piece by piece, redirecting the stolen assets back into the company they had been taken from, shoring up the cracked foundation. He saw Leo one last time, 3 weeks after the signing. They sat on opposite sides of a polished table in Anya Sharma's office, the final transfer documents between them. The man across from him was a stranger. The confidence and charisma had been stripped away, leaving behind a gray, diminished figure. Leo's expensive suit hung on him, his eyes were hollow, and he looked 10 years older. He had lost the company, his house, his boat, his money. He had lost everything that defined him. They didn't speak of betrayal or family. They spoke only through their lawyers, a sterile exchange of legal jargon that finalized the amputation. As Leo signed the last document, his eyes met Arthur's for a fleeting moment. There was no anger in his gaze, no plea for forgiveness, only a vast, empty landscape of loss. In that moment, Arthur felt no triumph. The victory was a bitter ash in his mouth. He had won, but the cost was a brother. He had saved the legacy, but he had been forced to excise a part of his own history to do so. When it was over, Arthur walked out into the city afternoon. The sun was bright, the streets were bustling with life, but he felt a profound and isolating sorrow. He had done what was necessary. He had acted with precision and control, maintaining the moral high ground in a conflict he never sought. But justice, he was learning, was a cold comfort. It could restore a balance sheet, but it could not mend a fractured family or erase the deep, ugly scar of betrayal. The fight was over, but the war had left wounds that he knew would never fully heal. 6 months later, the air smelled of wet concrete and possibility. Arthur stood on the muddy ground of a new construction site, the skeletal frame of a community library rising against the gray morning sky. The crane overhead moved with a slow, deliberate grace, lifting a steel I-beam into place. The sounds of impact wrenches and shouting foremen were a familiar, comforting music. This was his world, the only one where he had ever felt truly at home. The sign at the entrance to the site bore a new name: Northwood Construction. He had retired the Cresswell's son name, burying it along with the betrayal it now represented. The company was smaller now, leaner, but it was solvent. More importantly, it was honest. He had promoted a young, sharp project manager to run the day-to-day operations, but he found he couldn't quite bring himself to return to his workshop full-time. He came to the job sites, not as a boss, but as a mentor, an old builder with time-worn knowledge to share. He was shoring up a new foundation, one built on the hard lessons of the past. He had saved the company. He had protected the jobs of men and women who depended on it. He had achieved a perfect, cold, and legitimate justice. But victory had left him with a profound sense of emptiness. He had not sought a fight, but when one came, he had acted not out of rage, but out of a builder's instinct to defend the structural integrity of his life's work. The cost, however, was a currency he was still learning to count. Eleanor saw it in the quiet moments, in the way he would stare out the window, his mind clearly somewhere else. He had lost a brother, and no amount of financial restitution could fill that void. Back in his office, a small, functional space on the second floor of a building they were renovating, he kept a single photograph on his desk. It was an old, faded black and white print, taken the day they finished their very first project together, a simple two-car garage for a neighbor. In the photo, two young men stood shoulder to shoulder, grinning, their faces smudged with dirt and their arms slung around each other. Arthur was the tall, serious one, Leo the shorter, scrappier one with a smile that could talk a dog off a meat wagon. They were full of a shared, unshakable belief in the future they would build together. He picked up the photograph, his calloused thumb tracing the outline of his brother's smiling face. He had looked at it 1,000 times, trying to pinpoint the exact moment the crack had formed, the precise point of failure in their shared foundation. But there was no single moment. It was a slow erosion, a quiet, unseen decay that had been happening for years, hidden behind a facade of success and familial affection. He had won. He had salvaged the legacy and protected his family. But the photograph in his hand was a painful monument to what had been lost. The bond between them, which he had always considered the bedrock of his life, had been, for his brother, just another asset to be leveraged, a line item in a ledger of ambition and greed. He placed the photo back on the desk, a permanent reminder that even the strongest structures can be brought down from the inside, and that some victories are indistinguishable from loss. In the end, it was never about the millions, but about the lies they were built on. The story started with a gold-plated watch, a symbol of a prosperity that turned out to be fake, just like the bond between two brothers. Arthur's journey reminds us that true justice isn't always a celebration. Sometimes it's a quiet, painful act of demolition, tearing down a corrupted structure to save the foundation. We hope this story gave you something to think about here on Content Channel. It's a powerful look at the hard choices people make when betrayed by those they should be able to trust the most. We'd love to hear what you think in the comments. Do you believe Arthur made the right decision to pursue a private corporate coup instead of turning his brother over to the authorities? Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. We'll be exploring a new story where we discover what happens when one of Leo's dangerous partners decides that a quiet settlement isn't nearly enough to balance the books.